In May of 1941, one of Hitler's closest allies climbed into a fighter plane alone. No escort, no permission, no backup. He took off from Nazi Germany and flew directly toward Britain, enemy territory. His mission? To end the war. What happened next would become one of the strangest and most controversial missions of World War II. Because when he finally approached Scotland, he didn't land. He jumped. The man in that cockpit wasn't just any pilot. He was Rudolf Hess, Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany, second only to Hitler in the early years of the regime. He was a loyalist and a true believer, and one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich. But by 1941, something had changed. Hess had been quietly losing influence inside Hitler's inner circle. Other leaders, more aggressive, like Hermann Goering, or more political, like Joseph Goebbels, were taking his place. And while Germany prepared for its next major move, Hess was becoming irrelevant. But Hess believed he still had a role to play, a much bigger one. By May 1941, the war in Europe was at a turning point. Britain had refused to surrender. Despite relentless bombing by the German Luftwaffe, the British were still fighting. And Hitler was preparing for something massive. An invasion of the Soviet Union. But there was a problem. Germany could not afford a war on two fronts. Hess believed he had the solution. And it required him to do something no one else in Nazi Germany would ever consider. On the evening of Saturday, May 10th, 1941, Hess took off from Augsburg in southern Germany in a Messerschmitt Bf 110, a highly complex twin-engine heavy fighter he had very little experience with. It was not designed for diplomacy and not designed for a solo mission like this. The plan sounded simple. Fly northwest, then north, then across the North Sea. But nothing about this flight was simple. He was flying an aircraft he barely knew how to operate. Into enemy territory, at night, completely alone. No radio contact, no support, just rudimentary fuel calculations and arrogance. The destination Hess had chosen, not England, but Scotland. More specifically, the estate of a British aristocrat, the Duke of Hamilton, a man he had briefly met 5 years prior, who had no real influence within the British government and no connection to Winston Churchill. But Hess naively imagined this man might help broker peace. Oh, and yet another tiny problem. He'd be flying directly into enemy airspace. Rudolf Hess flew north over the North Sea with the hope of avoiding British radar facilities. Believing he had avoided detection, he then turned west towards Scotland, where things immediately began to unravel. British radar had detected the aircraft. In fact, they had been tracking him the entire time. You see, Hess began zigzagging back and forth for 40 minutes, waiting until it grew dark. He was also looking for his destination. By that time, not only had radar stations detected him, but locals on the ground heard the plane flying back and forth overhead. Fighter pilots were scrambled. Searchlights cut through the darkness. And Hess was running out of fuel. Despite circling, he couldn't locate his intended landing site. So he made a decision. High above the Scottish countryside, Rudolf Hess opened the canopy of his twin-engine fighter and jumped. But he had never been trained for a parachute jump. He hit the ground hard, twisting his ankle. Injured, disoriented, and completely alone. Behind him, his twin-engine Messerschmitt fighter crashed into a field. The mission was over. Not long after landing, Hess was discovered by a local Scottish farmer who had just watched a German aircraft fall out of the sky. He identified himself not as a soldier, but as a leader of the Nazi Party on a mission. A mission to meet with British officials, to negotiate peace. The farmer reacted with confusion, then disbelief, then arrest. When word of Hess's flight made its way to Hitler, he was furious. He publicly denounced Hess, declaring him insane, and claimed the mission had been carried out without his approval. Okay, to the world, this was the act of a madman. But behind the scenes, there were a ton of questions. Did Hess really act alone, or could this have been something more? And here's one. If Hess were truly a madman, then why did Hitler give him such a high government position? England didn't really want him. Germany definitely did not want him. Now, Rudolf Hess would spend the rest of his days in captivity. He was interrogated, definitely isolated, and never fully believed. No one really believed his story. Because even today, historians still debate what really happened. Was this a desperate gamble by a fading leader? A delusional act of loyalty? Or could it have been a secret mission that went terribly wrong? Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. On that night in 1941, one man, a single man, believed he could stop a world war, and instead became one of its strangest mysteries. And that's the part of this story that we rarely talk about.